The first episode of 2022, esteemed audience, and we're starting off right. We have three extraordinary guests. We're going to be joined by Adama Bah, we're going to be joined by Freshta Tori Jan, and Salvador Gómez-Colón. Welcome, everyone. I'm so thrilled you made time for Middle Grade Ninja. So regular listeners of the show know that I never summarize anyone else's biography or anyone else's book. Why would I make you sit there painfully struggling to listen to me make a mess of both of those things? And I'm going to go in the order that your publicist sent me your names, only fair way to do it. And so Adama, I'm going to ask you to go first and give us give a esteemed audience an overview of your background.
Hi, my name is Adama Bah. I grew up in Harlem and I am from New York City, currently live in the Bronx. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
And then Salvador, you're next on the publicist list.
So hi, everyone. Thank you, Rob. I'm Salvador Gómez-Colón. I'm a 19-year-old climate resilience advocate from San Juan, Puerto Rico, born and raised on the island. I'm the founder of Light and Hope for Puerto Rico, which is an initiative that I created after Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico in 2017. And I'm the author of Hurricane, My Story of Resilience, and currently an undergrad here at Yale.
And then Freshta.
Hi guys, I'm Freshta and I'm from Afghanistan. I'm a community activist and an entrepreneur and an author. And I'm so glad to be here today. Thank you guys.
And Freshta, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and tell us about the Eyewitness series that we're here to talk about.
Yeah, it's a series where, a few of us activists from around the globe, we're sharing our stories of everything that we have overcome and the many goals that we have, not only for improving our own communities, but how we can help each other and get the unheard social issues, heard on a bigger scale to the right leaders, to our, peers and the younger generation, the generations younger than us, so that they can also grow up to be informed, but then also make the right changes as needed.
And while we're with you, why don't you go ahead and tell us about your book, which just released here on January 11th, wink, wink, My Story of Persecution. I'm sorry, Courage, My Story of Persecution.
Yeah, so I was so honored to be part of this series. And this was a story that I had been wanting to share for a very long time. This is very close to my heart, and just with everything that's happened in my country in August and the Taliban taking over again, there were a lot of issues that the world didn't know, on top of just knowing that, yeah, Afghanistan has been dominated by terrorism for over 2 decades. There was this one issue of, the genocide that's happening against my ethnic group that the world does not know about, despite how involved the international world is in my country and has been for centuries. And, as Hazaras, we are not only native, the native ethnic group in the country, we are also now the minority. We went from being the majority from about 67% of the national population to now under 7%. And I don't know why this still has not been counted as a genocide. It's, a lot of people who have had a hand in this continue to be empowered by different leaders, and not only from Afghanistan but around the world, that are helping them continue to get empowered. Corrupt warlords that are taking position and seats time after time. And I just wanted to make sure that this is starting to be heard about, because as Hazaras, we have done absolutely nothing wrong. It's not a crime to be a Hazara. And the only comparison that I can make, and this is probably not even right of me to say, but a lot of the oppression that happened to our African American community, to our Native American community, and even during the Holocaust, these are very similar things that are happening to Hazaras even today. Hazaras are being hung upside down, and they are literally being persecuted in broad daylight. I remember when I was in 4th grade, all these Hazara communities were being attacked. And there were so many Hazara families trying to protest this, but the government continued to push them away. They silenced them. They made sure that they were intentionally barred from getting any access to even electricity. This was, all of these systemic racism and systemic barriers that were being intentionally created by the Afghan government. But then on top of that, other powers that were helping them make that a possibility.
And then we're gonna come back. I've got lots of follow-up questions on that, but for our overview, Salvador, why don't you tell us about Hurricane, My Story of Resilience?
So Hurricane, My Story of Resilience tells, my story of living through Hurricane Maria and the period after, in which I founded Light and Hope for Puerto Rico. So it narrates not only my experience of going through the hurricane and how it felt, sharing the sort of what I was seeing, what I was feeling during the hurricane itself and the days after, but also the process of first envisioning and then creating and bringing to life a humanitarian initiative like Light and Hope for Puerto Rico. So it's a two-part narrative encompassed in one. It's a story not only of a watershed moment in my life, but also what I did with that experience.
And then Adama, what does esteemed audience need to know about Accused, My Story of Injustice?
Sure. So Accused is my story of what happened to me after 9/11. So after 9/11, a lot of Muslims were being rounded up, mostly undocumented males were being rounded up. I was the first minor female to be detained and accused of terrorism after 9/11 in New York City. So my book goes into details about my interrogation. It's something, even though I advocate now and I often tell my story, but I never went into details about that story. And so this is why that book is very important, because for the first time, obviously I couldn't fit everything in the book, but the most important parts are in that book.
And Adama, who is the ideal reader for this book?
So anybody, to be honest with you. I think, I'm 33 now, and a lot of the things that I advocate for now are things that people in the 80s advocated for. And so things haven't really changed. So this book is for any generation, because the only way we can have positive change is by allowing those that are impacted to be part of that change, to make those changes, to be at the table. But until we have that, we're going to have the same cycle and circle of trauma that's being inflicted on communities of color.
And Salvador, is there an ideal reader for your book?
I think Adama's answer about her book is pretty spot on. I'd say about my book as well. I think that while the Eyewitness series books are written in a style that's geared for middle grade readers, and that just means the language is very accessible. I think that I'd say that also my story is timeless in the sense that it doesn't just appeal to young people, really anyone who wants a perspective on what it's like to live in a climate vulnerable community, in a community facing multiple hazards a year of natural disasters. But also I'd say it, as the title says, a story of resilience, of taking an experience like living through a climate disaster and using that as a way of empowering other people through a future that's going to be fraught with climate related disasters and climate change and its effects. So I'd say that my story, while written for middle grade readers, it's certainly a story that everyone can read, especially if you're interested in hearing a perspective of what it's like to live in a climate vulnerable region facing climate disaster, but also a firsthand narrative of grassroots work engaging with climate resilience.
Freshta, have you got a specific reader in mind for your book?
I think they both did a great job of summing that up. And, I have to agree with everything that they said. Although this was meant for a younger audience, this is really accessible to everyone, because the content that we're sharing in these stories are, real social issues that are affecting large communities. And there are a lot of people, whether you're young, whether you're old, it doesn't matter where you are in the age range. This is for you, and this is to share somebody else's journey with you and see how you can join that fight in improving society.
So we're talking about some heavy real world stuff specifically aimed at a younger audience, and so I'm fascinated to know. And Freshta, we'll start with you. When you're talking about genocide, when you're talking about it, I know your family members face kidnappings and daily murder attempts on the bus, on the way to school, just all around. When you're talking about the Taliban, how do you phrase that, or how do you formulate that for younger readers without undercutting the dark truth that they need to be aware of to understand the situation?
Yeah, that's something that I've had a very internal conflict with, because I want to be sensitive to their age and their background, but at the same time, there are a lot of young children, like my own, family members, my nieces and my nephew, ages from 3 to 11, that are experiencing these things right now. So part of me is like, no, I want to educate them, and I want to let them know real things that are happening to people around their age. But at the same time, I don't know where to make that a healthy line, because when I interact with a group of young people, I want to inform them as best I can while trying to give them details, but still being sensitive to their understanding, if that makes sense.
So where would you draw the line? This is a question I'm going to ask all of you, but Freshta, staying with you for a moment, where would you draw the line? What would be something that might be too intense for younger readers?
Yeah, I usually, just share with them, like, the things that would happen to you as a young Hazara girl if you went outside. Like, if I wanted to play with a guy, they would usually be very mean, and they would say very sexist things. So, those are things that I wouldn't mind sharing. But when it comes to, like, what happened when my siblings were kidnapped, or the different strategies that were used to try to kill and murder my family and myself, or those that I try to kind of verbalize differently, or try to not share as much about to young readers.
And then Adama, same question to you, because you're dealing with, you were 13 right after 9/11 and being openly treated badly. It's maybe the tritest possible way to phrase that. How do you approach that for younger readers?
So when I begin an event, I always tell them, listen, my story is not easy. It's very traumatic, and listening to trauma can also cause trauma. So I always open a room to listen. If you need to step out, let me know. If you need to do a check-in with me after, let me know. That's why it was very important for me in my book to mention, seek help if you need it. Even though a lot of the people that we tell our stories to weren't there, they're placing their own image, and they're placing their own scenario in their head. And again, this can cause trauma. It can cause fear, because like all of us, we're just victims. And this just randomly happened to us. And as a Black woman, when I tell my story to other young Black girls, they're like, well, this could happen to me too. And I'm like, and that's an understandable fear. And that's why it's important to seek the help if you need it.
In Salvador, something as catastrophic as a hurricane, what details do you choose to share with young readers, and what might you hold back to make it age appropriate?
So I sort of, my writing process in choosing what to share and what not to share in hurricane, I'd say that I shared 99% of my observations and my feelings. I think that one of the things that I wanted hurricane to be and be faithful to was my reflection of the emotions that I felt living through the hurricane, but also the sort of the lingering effects it had on my mindset and on my emotions, even years after, to this day, after nearly 3 years after Hurricane Maria. I'd say that in terms of what I chose to omit, I'm very frank about the observations I make about the distributions that I did in different towns. When I saw houses just torn to shreds from winds and dead livestock and I mean, unfortunately, I even saw corpses, on the ground, and I'd say like under debris and all that. And I think that for obvious purposes, I think that especially on Adama's point of not re-traumatizing or initiating trauma, I think that there's details there that don't have to be shared. I think that it wouldn't be prudent of me to share the state of a rotting living being. I think that's a pretty that's where you draw the line. But I think I'd say that I held nothing back, certainly in my emotions and sort of the vulnerability and the loneliness and the despair that I felt. I'm faithful to it. I'm honest about it, and I think that that's part of what makes my narrative useful and I'd say like compelling to young readers is the fact that I'm able to do that in a way that I hold nothing back.